It is 2 o'clock. Thank you, Larry. We are recording today's session, which is episode 191.
Woo.
There are two people who survived birthdays last week, and this week we have another birthday. Konnichiwa, Reba. Let's all sing in Japanese happy birthday to Reba.
Gail came.
Happy birthday to
you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Reba. Happy birthday to you.
That's right, Seth. You're absolutely right, Seth.
Sayonara.
Maurice,
Some quick announcements.
Maurice, you want to repeat it in your song?
Wait a minute. Some quick announcements first. The Israel Parade is being held in New York City on Madison Avenue, June 4th, from 11 to 4. A number of VFI people always show up. And if you need more information on it, send a note to Alana. She can give you some more detail.
I have no information on it.
Well, send it to me then. There's some emails we can forward to you.
Okay.
But
Mamash,
they do request.
I have no information.
They do request that you wear a Sarel or VFI apparatus T-shirt or something like that. And the head of Sarel and the military major who runs Sarel will both be marching in this parade, I'm told. Last time we spoke of AI. We could pick that dialogue up anytime. Again, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening. However, last week we were really blessed with Barry giving us chapter 1 of his Hollywood adventures, which we did not record, unfortunately. So we are recording this one, and Barry will be our headliner for today, and he will provide us with a little review of chapter 1 and then go into his chapter 2. And I have a feeling we're going to hear some very, very interesting names that'll bring back long memories. And that is being recorded. Presumably, it will wind up on YouTube at some point. Ilana, do you have anything to add?
No, not to that. I think we're good to go. Does Barry want to speak or?
Yeah, Barry's all lined up. There was one other announcement. We are almost ready to produce the VFI Plus programs for this spring and this fall, the archaeology program and the advanced program. We almost have dates to publish. Probably by next week, hopefully we'll be able to publish them. We need a lot of approvals from a lot of people like Sarel, the IDF, Tel Aviv University, 4 or 5 other people. So it's a real project getting these things tied down.
Oh, so Steve, the other thing, Steve, is I don't know if we want to bring it up because we don't know a ton about it yet, but there's going to be a way people have started to purchase Israel bonds on behalf of VFI. And when they mature, the money goes to VFI. So we're looking into that, and we'll get you the information once we have more of it.
Yeah, there'll be a mailer hopefully in a week or so on what that's all about. That's a new program. So that's the announcement for today. Does anybody have any pressing news before we turn it over to Barry?
I want to ask Pam and Arlene, that group that you called Johnny's group, did you ever get a date for that?
I know it's in October. Do you know, Alana, when Johnny's going? I wrote to him. He hasn't answered me. He might be away.
Yeah, he hasn't answered me either because I wrote to him. But
my other question is,
date.
I mean, it's after the holidays, so whenever that
it's the week that starts on the 8th, which is the last day of the holidays for us, and it's not on for Israel. So I'm going to plan to go the following week is what I'm planning.
Well, I know that in Johnny's group, because he's got all these people, and it's a 3-week group. It's a 3-week group, but people are coming each week. Some are staying 1 week, some are staying 2 weeks, some are staying 3 weeks. So any of those weeks.
Are they going to be on the same base, Pam? Are they all going to be on the same base?
His group is all going to be on the same base.
Okay. What are the chances it's Matzraf?
What? He would prefer, Johnny prefers not Matzraf. He likes other bases. So
if I'm going to go again, I want to be on my
right. Right. No, he prefers other bases, so he asks for other bases.
Yeah.
So do you know where he's going to be assigned yet, Pam? Not the special dance. I'll see if he responds to me. I'll reach out to him again because I sent him a text.
No, it's very unusual that he didn't answer me.
Yeah, and it's unusual. He usually responds to me as well.
Yeah, he might be away or something.
Yeah, maybe some vacation. But that's when I'm going to go. So if anybody else wants to go at the same time I am, I would be happy to have you come. Love
Yeah,
to
well,
meet
then
you in
if you're
person.
going at that time, then you should definitely tell him you want to be part of his group because his group's really nice. You know,
Yeah.
as I say, I put them all together the core group I put together a long time ago, and the core group has stayed together. And they don't all come every year, but some of them do, some of them don't.
This may be the 12th or 15th time he's done it too.
Yeah.
So that's great.
He's
Okay,
amazing.
great.
No,
Okay,
it's
at
not-
this point,
it's not the 15th, but he's done it
it's
several.
up there. Okay. At this time, I'd like to reintroduce somebody who knows no introduction. Mr. Barry, you're on.
Thank you, Steve. We briefly spoke a little bit before, and since we didn't record last time, I'll just run down a list of some of the people that we talked about, and we'll just quickly go down the list. And then if anyone wants to know more about any of these people, you can always contact me and I can give you the nitty-gritty of what actually happened. So anyhow, I'm just going to go down a quick list here. One, the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, Surfing USA back in the 50s, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, who just passed away, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Olivia Newton-John, James Taylor, The Sopranos, if you remember the TV show, James Gofandi, Tab Hunter, Rona Barrett, John Cleese, Monty Python, and Fawlty Towers, funny man, Jonathan Winters, Doc Severinsen. We were very close. We worked out. He was on the Johnny Carson show and quite an amazing guy. Charlie's Angels, Cheryl Ladd, we were very close. John Forsythe, 77 Sunset Strip, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and then the Laugh-In show, Ian Bernard, who was the director. We were very close, and then I met and connected with Ruth Buzzy, if you would remember the little old lady that used to hit Artie Johnson, the guy who used to say, he played the role of the German, Verdi and Sting, whatever the role he had, that, and another one he'd be hit. And he became famous from that. And it was ironic because he was an absolute genius, a writer, a philosopher, a teacher. And the guy became famous for those crazy things. Then there was Bo Derek, my relationship with Bo and John Derek back there. And remember, the guys will remember her for the movie 10, Running Along the Beach. Then Fess Parker, I had a wonderful relationship with Fess. And if you remember, he was Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. And his sidekick was Ed Ames of the Ames Brothers, who was a terrific guy, a great singer. And our relationship
recently passed away.
Yes, absolutely. So anyhow, we got some interesting stories with Fess and I, and we were both on Coumadin. If you remember what Coumadin was during recovery, the pharmaceutical people will remember that was rat poison. And I had a relationship with his daughter. Anyhow, there was that.
Lots of relationships there.
Yeah, whatever. You wanted an update on Teresa. We got together last week. She came through town. We did have a warm connection, and so should be back now in Little Rock, and she'll be back here in another month and a half, and we'll see what happens.
So where did she stay when she came back that week? On Friday.
She came back through here, and she had, evidently they have a home up in the Sierras. So she was en route. She was just in a rental car. So we stayed together as long as she could. Then she had to jump in the car, and she drove up to a little town and then to the Sierras. And then she had to catch a plane and fly back to Little Rock. So she's doing whatever she's doing, and we'll see what happens. So that's the update on that one. So anyhow, so we went down that list. I remember I showed some photographs of Charlie Chan. I had a very close relationship. I don't know, can you get these things up? You know how to?
You can see it.
Somehow they can transfer this so I show up,
Right.
you know. Can Steve do that, or do I hit something so we can get my
Spotlight.
Pardon?
Yeah, if you can mail me a picture of that picture taken on your iPhone, then I can include that in the movie.
No, he meant because last week Alana highlighted him, and then he.
Yeah. Spotlight.
Spotlight, right.
Oh, yeah. You're on Spotlight for me now.
But it's not showing up.
Yeah.
There we are.
I tried to leave for a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's just one of those. And this was, again, Charlie Chan. Some great stories with Charlie Chan. Okay, so we hit sort of those people, whatever. And now we're going to go fast forward to Squibb in Philadelphia. Squibb, Bristol Myers, this guy was an absolute genius, and he invested all of the pharmaceuticals in the long history. And what he did was he started a school here in San Ynez Valley, just north of Santa Barbara, called Midland School. And he wanted to prepare a college preparatory school that would compete with your great schools. So he bought several thousand acres up in the hills, and they started that program with Squibb. Now, the interesting thing of that is this place, the school that he started, Midland School, is right across the road from Neverland. Remember Neverland, anyone? Michael Jackson. So my son was a student there at Midland, and again, Neverland was right across the road. You just looked and saw the entrance to Neverland. And this was back when Thriller was popular and Michael Jackson was on top of the world and what have you. It was a pretty famous place. You couldn't get there. So one day, my son Randall was down in a field or something. Nobody was around, and somebody rode up on an ATV, had a helmet on, and he came up and he took the helmet off, and it was Michael Jackson, and said, "Hi, hi, Michael." He said, "My niece is having a birthday tomorrow, and I'd like to throw a party. So could you get maybe a dozen of your friends here at the school, and I'll send a vehicle down, and we'll have a big party up at Neverland." And Randall says, "Okay, that sounds like fun." So he went back to the headmaster, and she says, "No way. We only allow people to go up there, and that won't work. Sorry, we can't do that." Anyhow, the kids got upset, and finally she agreed. All right, we'll do that. Anyhow, but what happened was Fran and I were on a trip halfway around the world, and we get a text, email, or something from Randall, and he says, "Hi, folks. Gee, I had a really interesting time the other day." And we said, "What?" And he says, "Well, and he tells this story of the ATV and Michael Jackson, and finally they wouldn't let it, and then finally they said, yeah, they said it's okay." So anyhow, Michael Jackson sent his vehicle, and Randall and his buddies went up there, and they spent the day up at Neverland. And usually Michael Jackson isn't around, but he was there, and he says, "No, I'm just going to spend time with you." So they spent the day with Michael Jackson and went into places in Neverland where normally you don't go there, and what have you. And one of the funny things was they were goofing around someplace, and there was a piano, and Michael said, "Anybody play the piano?" And Randall said, "Yeah, I do." So he says, come on. So they sat down at the piano and they started playing. They started with chopsticks and played, he's telling us I'm playing with Michael Jackson, and he goes on all the details and of the place. And so anyhow, we're getting this on the ship, the email, and Fran and I are looking at each other and says, there he is again, Randall. Randall went on to be a film person, screenwriter, the movies with Mario Puzo, and he had an imagination. And we said another one of his bullshit stories. So we kind of wrote it off and forgot about that. And it was like weeks later or something, I happened to be up there. I used to take apples up there, and I ran up to Wanda and I says, hey, Randall's back to his old stories again. And he gave us this bullshit story about playing the piano with Michael Jackson. And she looked at me and she said, no, I finally approved it. That story was true. He did play with Michael Jackson. And that was that. So that was kind of and then Michael Jackson, Randall said, your family has an open invitation to come up to Neverland anytime you want. And then he got into a lot of trouble, and that was Michael Jackson and the Squib connection, and that's that. Now another one with another one of my sons, Randall. We had a wedding at the ranch. It was a couple of hundred people. It was a big wedding and what have you. And the theme of the wedding was what is it? Also the movie. God, all of a sudden I got it with Andy Williams, Henry Mancini, Moon River. Mm-hmm. Moon River was the theme of the wedding, and they played Moon River, and that was that. And the wedding was over, and about a week later, we get a package at the ranch, and there's this package, and in the package there's a framed letter, and also these fantastic cups. These were museum quality cups that were engraved, and it was with the music of Moon River, all the notes around this cups, and they were just really stunning. And then the letter explained it, that at the wedding, Andy Williams' son was at the wedding. We didn't know that at the time. And in the letter, he just explained he was at the wedding, and that and this letter went on that we have explained how Moon River came about. Henry Mancini had, he had the lyrics of the song, and he called Andy Williams and he says, "Hey, I've got this great song. This is going to be a song that more people are going to, and I'll have to clean it up. There's going to be more screwing with Moon River as a background than any other song ever written." And that's what this letter explained about this connection with Moon River. And then he went on to say that Henry Mancini loved that music and the song, and it was the most important thing that he ever did. And he commissioned and had these cups made, and they were his prized possession. All of this explained in the letter. And he said he gave them to Andy Williams, and they became Andy Williams' prized possession. And Andy Williams, before he passed away, gave them to his son. And his son said, "We decided that we want you to have them." So we ended up with those cups. We have those cups. They're beautiful. If I ever get them here or something, we'll show you a picture of and how that song came about. So there was that. Then some of the other things my wife was involved with as a producer, and she put on shows with back Ray Charles when he was first starting, and nobody knew who he was, and he sang a song called "The Banana Boat," a Jamaican song. You remember "Day is a Day is a Day." all of a sudden that song took off, and now Charles became famous for calypso music and in Jamaica, and then Bob Marley came into, if you remember who he was, and it went from there. And then Fran put on shows with Tom Jones, the Welsh singer Delilah. John Denver was a neighbor here, Rocky Mountain High, and he had a plane here and he crashed and died. And that was that. I didn't have a whole lot of contact with him at that time, but then I don't know whether anybody remembers the movie called The Night of the Iguana. That was an interesting movie back in the 60s. And I was traveling at that time, and I rode my motorcycle down to Mexico, and I happened to be down in that neighborhood at the time they were making the movie. And I was just hanging out there and in Puerto Vallarta and what have you. And somebody came up and said, "Hey, they're making a movie here. It's some guy named Richard Burton, and he's got an affair with this Elizabeth Taylor." And they're down there. That was in, I think, 63. And they need some gringos to be stand-ins in the movie. So I ended up in Mismaloya in that movie. I had a little bit part in the background with the Night of the Iguana, and I had some funny stories that took place there. And then one of my neighbors, back at home, were the Smothers Brothers. They were from San Jose, and they grew up, and they were on Laugh-In. And so that's sort of a summary of what we went over last time. And let me think what else we had. So that's kind of where I am at this point. And then I mentioned to Steve that I had, some other interesting people, places, and things and events that took place. And I'm just going to throw out just a couple of names or things, and you can jot it down if you want. And these are topics that I could give you a talk on. One of them is Sobibor, Sobibor. That may ring a bell to somebody, but Google it. Google Sobibor, the escape from Sobibor, and Thomas Blatt was the young Polish fella that was involved with that. And I spent years with Thomas Blatt, and we did some documentary update movies of Sobibor. It's a fascinating story of the Holocaust. I could give a little talk on that. Then the Porsche, the 959. That's the number to remember, 959. And my story with Germany and Microsoft and Gates and our smuggling the 954, and my racing days were, and if you ever Googled Canepa, Canepa Motorsports, my involvement with them and the racing. So those were a couple of topics that maybe if anybody was interested in, we can talk about. And then, I've got some other history of my troubles at Sorbonne and the University of Vienna and Viktor Frankl, and some of my arrest records in Budapest, and then my involvement with Auschwitz and Elie Wiesel, and that's sort of my life at this point. So,
how young were you when you were in the university with Frankl?
I was 18. I had gotten a couple of scholarships when I was going to UCLA, and one to Sorbonne and one to the University of Vienna. So I was 18 years old studying at UCLA. I took both of them. I figured I'll see what happens. And I ended up at Sorbonne briefly. I got kicked out after 2 weeks. because I was 18 years old living in the left bank, and I didn't think going to school was too interesting, and and my French wasn't that good, so they kicked me out of there, and I ended up in Vienna, and I was going to study international law. That's what I was interested in. And somebody mentioned, there's this place, Polyclinic. It's in the bowels of Vienna, way up in the Vienna woods, and there's this guy Frankel. He's kind of an interesting guy. You might find something interesting there. So that's how it started. I jumped on a trolley and I went back to this place, and it was like out of a Frankenstein movie. It was dreary, and there were big iron gates and electronic entry, and you had to hit a button and you had to see whether they'd let you in. And that's how it started. I got in there. I thought I'd never get out, and connected with Frankel and spent almost a year with him doing research on and psychology and what have you. And it was fascinating because when we have a patient, they'd wheel him in a wheelchair or a straitjacket, and we could do things in interview that normally you couldn't do in other countries. So, and then it started. I don't want to get into that, but just quickly, I was not a fan of Austria during the war, and what the Austrians did to the Jews during the Holocaust era. And I knew some stuff was going on I didn't like it. So there were archives when I was at the university there that I wanted to find out. There were locked doors, and I would go at night and I'd kick the doors in, and I'd get in, and I got to some files back at the Polyclinic and pulled out some documents of experiments that they were doing at the Polyclinic that made Dachau look like kids stuff. And I go, whoa. And that's been locked up ever since. The Austrian government doesn't want anybody to know about what happened. So I did smuggle some of that stuff out, and that was my connection with the Holocaust. Once I came back home, I gave a lecture or two, and then it was just too troublesome for me, and I put it away. And eventually, fast forward years went through because of my connection with that stuff, and I ended up in 1988. There were 5 American men selected, and I happened to be one of the 5 because of those documents and things, to go back to in 1988 to the 45th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And then we were going to fly the first flight ever from Poland to Israel. We had no relations. And at that time, Jews were not popular in Poland. They were still in bed with the Arabs and the PLO and what have you. So anyhow, that's how it evolved. And then it got very interesting from that point out when we escorted 3,400 survivors back to Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, and my experiences there were quite amazing with some amazing people that ended up with Elie Wiesel. Anyhow, there I go rambling on it. So now I still have connections with the few survivors of the camps here. And as a matter of fact, yesterday I spent all afternoon with a fascinating man, Charles Berger, who was in the French underground during the war. And he just told me stories yesterday that I'd love to have him come speak to the group. He was there during that time, and his stories. And then it turns out he played the clarinet with Louis Armstrong. And then his cousin was, I'm trying to think, the mime, Marcel Marceau, I think. Yeah, that and I'm walking around there yesterday. I should have taken pictures, and here's pictures of Charles with Louis Armstrong playing, and then Marcel Marceau and his connections, and he had some wonderful stories, and he's still around. So that's sort of what's happening now with me.
Wow.
From time to time, you've touched on your racing, which is a guy thing, I hope.
Yeah, I've got some really interesting stories with the 959 in particular. This vehicle, they described it as a beast. This was the most powerful vehicle ever been created by the Germans, by Porsche. We were competing with the Ferrari F-140, and we said, let's see if we can get a car that's faster, more powerful, and what can we do? And that's where it started with the 959, and they did some research on that car, and the stories that take off to this day now with the 959 and my involvement with Porsche and Bill Gates and smuggling. They wouldn't let it come into the country, but I had some very funny stories with Porsche, the people, and my history with the Germans is not too good. I'm not a great fan of what transpired during the war, and I got my revenge with Porsche on the 959. So that was one, and then fast forward, I ended up on Craig Breedlove's team, Spirit of America, and then I ended up with the British team, the Royal Air Force Thrust, and I was there when on the team when we broke the sound barrier and set a lot of world records, and have some really interesting stories about the sound barrier in World War II and the Germans, and what was going on with the V2 and the Royal Air Force. So, I could give an interesting talk just on my commitment, and I have a lot of pictures of when we broke the sound barrier.
That would be fun to hear, as well as more of your time when you were just 18-year-old there in Vienna.
Yeah, those are some interesting things that transpired in Vienna. For some reason I could never understand, I always wanted to go to Vienna and Budapest, but I never had any connection with these places. I'm Ashkenazi. My family is from the Ukraine, Russian. We're out of the Topol area, and that's been my background. But I just had this urging to go there. And I was going to school in Vienna, and my roommates, they had a family farm right in 1959, right on the the Iron Curtain. Across the road were the minefields, and no Americans were allowed into Hungary at that time from the revolution 1956. So I asked him, could you get me in just so I can touch base, put my foot into Hungary for some reason? He says, yeah, there's a lake there that kind of runs there, but it's very dangerous. The guard towers are all over there. So one night we went down there and we got a boat and we started rowing out into the lake, and those were the first gunshots that I had to dodge. They were shooting at us from all over. So we got out of there real quick. And then that didn't work. And then there was a train in a town called Soprol. Anyhow, I tried to do something there. I got arrested by the KGB at that time. They took my films and what have you. Luckily, I spoke enough Russian that they let me go. And that was the end of that. And then later, sometime shortly after, they said, we can get you into Budapest. What? You can't go there. No American has set foot into Hungary since 1956. We can get you in. You want to go? Yeah. So anyhow, we transported, they took me to the Hungarian border with my lady friend. And at that time, the guards just spoke Russians. There were only Russians there. Nobody spoke Hungarian. Anyhow, they put us in a vehicle and we drive now to Budapest. And now we're the only Americans that have ever been there. And I have nothing exciting happens. KGB was all over me, but nothing of interest happened during that week or two until we left. And when we came back to the border, her passport, they took our passports, and her passport was missing. It was worth a lot of money. So they immediately put her under arrest. And I looked and I started yelling at them a thing. And then they pointed the guns at me and says, "You're under arrest." So now we're both under arrest. And they said, "We're taking you back to Budapest." So they threw us in an old army truck, and we're there, and the two guards are sitting there with the guns, by the tailgate. And I tell her, we're going to bolt. As soon as they get back there, they have to go check in. Both of them will to the driver. And when they go, we're running. So as soon as they moved, I grabbed her, and I knew the back streets of Budapest, and I knew I could get to the Canadian embassy. And so we did that. We're running through there and they're chasing us, and I get to the Canadian embassy. And so we're there. They grant us immunity. I don't know what they want us. We're just a couple of students. And so I look over at a newspaper, and the U-2 was shot down. Francis Gary Powers is now, we're about to go to war. And I go, that's great. We're the front line. We're the only Americans here. And so anyhow, nothing came of that. They eventually let us go. And that's the end of the story of getting out of Budapest at that time. But that was not a good place to go if you were a Jew.
How about East Germany, West Germany?
I was never involved with East Germany, West Germany. I'd have to think what my connection. One connection, when I was in Vienna, and my roommate came to me and he says, "Would you like to go to a neo-Nazi movie? A neo-Nazi meeting?" And I go, "Yeah. Do they still have neo-Nazis?" He says, "Yeah. There's this university, a school in Tübingen is the name, it's in Germany." And I said, "Can you get me there?" And he says, "Yes, we have some connections." And he says, "First of all, you have to have a new identity. Your name is Ahmed Madul, whatever it is. You're a Palestinian, and you get that Star of David off your neck. And let's practice a little Arabic, because if they knew you were a Jew, we'd never get you in." So all of a sudden I became a Palestinian at that time. So we drove, it was a night, and we got to Tübingen, and it was a spooky place. And there was an old bridge out of the 1800s or something. And we went underneath the bridge, and at the end of the bridge, there was a door, a gate, and doors. And they opened a little box, and they looked, "Who are you?" And "This is Ahmed, da 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 da." So we passed muster, and they opened the door. And as we walk in, they closed the door behind it. And I walk in, and everywhere are Nazi flags, and they're singing Deutschland über alles. And a lot of these guys had scars on their face. They were, from dueling. It was the neo-Nazis, and that stuff was still going on. And that was 1959 when I had that experience, and that was that. And then I was in Stuttgart. I was racing with Porsche at that time, and I wanted to bring a Porsche back. I ended up buying an Alfa Romeo. I ended up racing the Alfa Romeo in Italy with that car. And those are all stories I had with, my only contact with Germany. I was never a fan of Germany. I did go to Baden-Baden and had some connections there, but I wanted to get out of Germany as fast as I could, and I hated Stuttgart and all those places.
Have you written an autobiography with all of this information that you're telling us about?
I do have a daily diary, and I do keep, and I have manuscripts. I must have 500 pages of detailed manuscripts of these events that took place, that I kept it in. And it's just, my life has been so fascinating and interesting that every day is a new day, and I have a new page to write, and that's what I'm doing. I'm writing new pages, and I don't have time to go back and put all of this stuff together.
You need a ghostwriter. You need a ghostwriter.
Yes,
will help do that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I've interviewed a couple of people, and it's going to be, I'm just going to have to settle in and sit down with videos. I have 7, 8, 12,000 pictures on here that I did keep, and I did go through some old archives that I didn't realize I had, and that are still at the ranch and back in storage. And I'm finding things now that I didn't know I had, things like these pictures. And so I'm hopefully, my health is good. I feel great. I got a great family in the Bay Area, and now I'm getting out and about. So hopefully, you're right. I'm going to have to get my friend Teresa that we met with the Mystery of the Marie boat. She said, I'd like to maybe help you. She's done several books, and maybe I can give you some guidance.
Great. I have an acquaintance, a good acquaintance, whose father was a Holocaust survivor, and the daughter, so you might assign one of your relatives to kind of help get this started. She ended up getting somebody to come on in, be the ghostwriter, and eventually getting screenwriters to work up a documentary and everything else. So, it's just you need to have somebody in your family who's interested in following through on that. So
yes, and that's exactly what happened this week with me. I got into genealogy, and I'm doing some genealogy stuff, and all of a sudden we do tracing, and I find out Grandpa Herman on my mother's side was born in Budapest. And I go, whoa. And my grandma, who I never met, I met him, he lived to be 100. She was born in Vienna. And that's this strange quirk I had. I wanted to touch base with Vienna. I ended up going to school in Vienna and in Budapest. Now I met with a fabulous man. He's a doctor, Paul Gertler. We get together on Tuesdays and we have a meeting. And the meeting I had with him was fascinating last week. He's from Budapest, Hungary. He was a child. And when the Nazis came in and they took his father went off, and they took his mother, and they went off to the camps. And he's now relaying this story as a child of Budapest and how they survived and miraculously made it through the war. She was in Auschwitz. And now he's telling me this great story and his connection. And he said, I just found a connection in Budapest. In Budapest, there's a Jewish organization called the Jewish Jewish History Community. And I contacted them, and I found a lady that speaks English. So he just emailed me last night the phone number for this organization where I'm going to be connecting them in Budapest to be tracing my grandfather's history and background into Budapest. So there are organizations now related to Jewish survivors of the war, and so that's my next step. I'm hoping to make that phone call. There are about 14 numbers I have to hit to get through to Budapest, and trying to get to the English-speaking lady. And but they do have organizations there that can help you with your family history.
So whom do you want to play the part of Barry in the movie, Barry?
Oh,
I know
my
Harry.
God.
I know Harry would like to play you.
Yeah, and I've got some funny stories with people and what have you with the movies. Alan Arkin was a great. I was a big fan with Sobibor. A movie was done from the ashes of Sobibor. I have the book over here. There've been several books with Thomas Blatt, and I was very lucky to spend a lot of time with him and the history of Sobibor. And so we were just, I was working with him. We had a trip. We were going back to Poland, to Warsaw, because everybody wants to still do movies. And we've done an updated screenplay of Sobibor and the history of that period. So we had a trip scheduled to go back to meet with the government, the Polish government. They wanted to do some stuff with us. So we had that trip scheduled, and then Thomas passed away about just before COVID. So that trip never took place, or I would probably be right now back in Warsaw doing updates on this stuff. But there's some amazing things, and with his involvement with the Nuremberg trials, and again, if you get a chance, just hit Sobibor. They did a movie. Chrysler did a movie. I've got the date when they did it.
Most of us have seen it, Barry.
Pardon?
I'm sure most of us have seen it.
Oh, you maybe saw that one. There were 32,000 people that signed up for that movie, The Escape from Sobibor, Out of the Ashes. And incredible story of and how he ended up here, Thomas Blatt, and the stuff we did. He's given me things, and I have things here from Thomas, and the family gave me things related to the Nuremberg trials, and he was instrumental in those trials. Some of the stuff, his story of what Thomas did was absolutely amazing. And then at the end, it was strange. Thomas was a very independent guy, if you can imagine what he survived, and came out. And when he came to the country, and the guy wouldn't listen to anybody, his family, they couldn't control Thomas. He was just a real rebel. And we hit it off, and we spent time, and we became very close, Thomas. And for some reason, the family said, you're the only person that has any influence with Thomas, and he will do what you say. And there were times when they'd put him in the hospital, and we'd get a call in the middle of the night. He just pulled the IVs out. He doesn't want to stay in the hospital, and he's running down the hall. Get down here. And that was Thomas. And he didn't want to get in a car. He still drove. He wouldn't let anybody drive. And so I had some very funny stories of Thomas and what we did, and his involvement with going back to that era. But fascinating guy.
Can I ask you a question? I have
Sure.
a granddaughter who's working, who went to Munich to go to college. And because she comes from the grandparents were Holocaust survivors, she has a dual citizenship, German and American. Tuition to go to the university was very inexpensive. She's now going into a PhD program. She's deeply involved as far as Holocaust information. And just wondering if with your experiences and the intensity of her interest, if she might in some way, if you're interested and she's interested, for her to communicate with you in terms of some of the ideas and thoughts.
I'd love to. Absolutely. That's my raison d'etre at this point. All of us, whether it was Thomas Blatt, virtually all of these people, Charles Berger, everyone, our reason we survived. Charles is 95. I've lost most of my Holocaust friends. They're all gone. They're not around anymore. They're just a handful. And we've got to keep the dream alive. And this is our role, is to get young people any way we can,
yes,
to keep them involved in our history, which is dying out. You know, most of the American students, they don't even know what the hell the Holocaust was. They don't even know who Hitler was. It's tragic what's going on in our education system. So the ones that are still around, absolutely, there's nothing we love more than to meet with young people that are interested, that are going to keep our traditions going. And the good news is we're going to survive.
Yes, she just finished an internship at the Smithsonian Institute. She did the background history on Lillian Vernon, who had the catalogs in the 50s, 60s.
Yes.
And the Smithsonian wants her to come back to do more work as far as the Holocaust is concerned. So
that's wonderful.
She's waiting for them to she have to be a PhD to be a curator.
Right.
So she's waiting for them to try to come up with some money to help her. She's a 33-year-old young woman. And as I say, not working, trying to get all this stuff done. So she's waiting to go back over the summer, to go back to the Smithsonian to continue with whatever it is that they need. So she's committed and determined. And as I listen to your stories, and all I can think of is Haley with just, she would be so excited to hear what you have to say.
Wonderful. And who knows, maybe we can make a contact with someone who has the funds and the wherewithal to help her financially support and carry out what she's doing. That's very important now.
What do you suggest in terms of contact information? Do you want me to put something in the chat from my?
Yeah, you could. We'd have to go down that. There's so many organizations around that are still around that do stuff through the Federation, even through Chabad. Chabad's pretty amazing. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Those folks. So, we just have to think and see who we could, connect her with. So.
Well, as I say, it's just so that we don't, as I say, I can't imagine how she can live in Munich and be so involved with the community when with what you're talking about, the Holocaust and all of the things that we read and we see and we hear. How can you live there? How can you be there based on what's happened?
One thing
there are still people around in virtually all of these places that are keeping the dream alive, and we're getting stronger throughout the world and virtually everywhere in the world. Even in Iran, there are small groups of Jews that are now getting together and sharing these stories. That's what's important.
All right. Well, I'll send her an email and tell her that I heard about you, and maybe through Steve that he can send me, or I can send him. Use kind of Steve, if you don't mind. just to
Sure.
try to make the connection.
Sure.
Sure.
Thank
Wow.
you so
Well,
much.
It sounds to me that we have an overwhelming amount of material for chapter 3. Just to
Okay.
select the focus, if you're willing and interested, to select the focus on something, one of the numerous things you mentioned, and lecture us to it. Is there anything?
Sure. Yeah, Sobibor is the one that I think
Okay,
hits home to all of us.
let's give it a shot. Yeah, we can
Okay,
all,
so
as a homework
we can-
assignment. Yeah, as a homework
Okay,
assignment.
so we can focus next time or whatever on Sobibor. That's the most important one.
Anybody have any other ideas or preferences? I'd like to hear more about the breaking the speed record with Breedlove with that Spirit of America.
Yeah,
car.
that's
world class.
a real fascinating one. And again, with that the 959, I'm probably one of the few people on Earth that ever sat in a 959 when we took it out to test it in the middle of the night. It was illegal. We had it hidden, and and all of a sudden my Canepa, who's a very famous race car driver, and we had that thing hidden in the Oakland area in a trade-free zone, and there's no way that could be seen on the road at that time. And he called me. He says, "I'm picking you up. We're going to get that car. We're going to take it out for a ride." And I go, "No." And he says, "Yeah, come on." And we did. And we went there and we took that beast out. And I'm telling you, I've been in a lot of race cars in my life. That thing was so powerful. It had 4-wheel drive, and it had an engine that it was just a monster. And
you'll have to save this, Barry, for your talk then, because
okay.
You're gonna let it all down. We want to hear it in depth.
Oh, okay. So we can do that. But if you want, if anybody is interested in that, the word Canepa, Canepa, Canepa. He's here in California, Canepa Motorsports. Just hit Canepa Motorsports and it'll pull up this. I represented him for 15 years and kept him out of jail. And and his story, if you want to Google on these cars, they're the 959. And
when you give your talk, we'll be able to have you tell us. It sounds interesting.
Okay. So, Gail, you got lots of interesting stuff with your family too.
Nothing like yours, so believe me.
Oh no.
Well, that's great. Well, Barry, thank you for following through with your idea and your commitment to, to illuminate us on some of the more interesting things that have happened to you personally. We can only dream of doing some of those things. That's great. So, is it okay if we schedule chapter 3 for next weekend?
Sure.
Okay.
We can do that. And if anybody wants to do any history a little bit, you can Google Sobibor and Thomas Flatt, and you'll get a little heads up of who he was, and that story is remarkable.
Okay.
I just put the links to the 2 movies that I found that were online. One is the Russian adaptation in 2018, and the other one is the one you're talking about, which was 1087. Yeah. So people can take a look at that before your talk.
Terrific. And anybody that finds out some information, please. We get information all the time, every day. Like last week, Tuesday's lunch from Hungary and from Paul. And wow, I learned some things. fascinating things of how the Russians, when she was released from Dachau in the hospital, and they were just, when the Russians came and they found her, she was barely alive. She was dying, and the Russians, if you were a German, forget it. They let you die. But they found out she was released from the camp. She was Jewish, and at that time, the Russians took her to Russian hospitals, and for the next 6 months, the Russians kept her alive. They gave her the best medical treatment they could ever give, and the Russians at that time, if there was a survivor coming out and you were Jewish and you weren't a German, they would treat you like a queen, and she did. And thank God the Russians got her before anyone else got her, his mom, and she recovered and became healthy and eventually came to the United States. So there were good things the Russians did at that time.
I just got through watching or listening to one of the Yad Vashem in-depth interviews of a man who acted a part of a Christian during the Warsaw, last part of the Warsaw uprisings, and he had been a part of those young men taking the part of a Christian, and he escaped into the forests, and the Soviet Union soldiers were coming on in to take over Warsaw, and he ran into one of them when he was in the woods, and he said, I'm Jewish, and the guy disgustingly said, this young Soviet soldier, the first person I'm rescuing is a Jew. and he just said, go to the back, and he kept advancing. So he had a little different experience than your person did.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me get back here.
But nonetheless, he was rescued by
Hold on a second.
Soviets.
Here, yes, the stories are really fascinating. I got some interesting one. This is, does that show up or whatever? This says 45th anniversary of the uprising in Warsaw ghettos, Warsaw, 1988.
And his friend.
That's where I was at that time, and I've got some really interesting stories about survivors of the camps getting out into the woods. Just quickly, one of my cousins from Skokie, Jewish, survived the camps, but he would never talk about it. And when I visited the family back there for the first time, he liked me, and he called me over to the side, and he said, I'm going to tell you a story. And Herman told me the story that he got out of the camps and ran into the woods, as you said. And he was going, whoa, what do I do? And the first thing he did, in the woods, he waited till he could find a German soldier alone. He said, I got up behind him and I strangled him. I killed him. And I took his uniform and I put his uniform on. And now I'm walking through the woods and I see a train. I don't know where it's going or what have you. So I jump on the train, and as he's sitting on the train, he doesn't realize the train is coming from the east, from Russia, and the Russians are just up the road coming in. And the last thing you want to be is a German at that time. They kill you. So somebody said something. They looked at him. What are you doing here? And he goes, no, I was from the camp. They said, get rid of that uniform. So he jumped off the train and he got into the woods, and he waited till he found a Russian soldier alone. He says, I strangled him. And I put the Russian uniform on and jumped back on the train. And that was my life. I survived. They took care of me from that. But I've heard several stories of the woods and how they survived.
I'll share something with you with Haley's. Her grandmother's brother was escaped from the concentration camps, and he escaped and he got to the train station and he was petrified for what if they caught him, and he was able to manipulate, like what you said with the story you just told. He escaped and he went to Israel and he joined the Haganah.
Yes.
That was what he did. This man is now 100 years old.
Yes.
And still has stories to tell.
Oh.
It's unbelievable.
That's amazing. Now, we have all in the Volunteers for Israel have gone to many museums. And how many people here have gone to the Haganah Museum as part of, our trips? Oh, Steve, you have? Yeah. It's a fascinating museum. And if you have a chance to have a guide, which we did because we were Volunteers for Israel group, it's really a fascinating museum to go to and to be able to see it. And
right.
People who are new on coming to Israel with the Volunteers for Israel, having a chance to go with Volunteers for Israel to these various military museums and sites is a wonderful opportunity to really understand the sacrifices. I mean, we've just gone through Memorial Day here in the United States, the sacrifices that Israelis have made to keep their country alive and going.
Yes.
And we have we were watching the memorial ceremonies in Washington, D.C. They're always poignant and tender every year. And my daughter was sitting with us and she said, when you really think about it, it's kind of scary. There are more people who have died in the United States now from COVID than have died in all of the wars, all of our wars, from the Revolutionary War to the Afghanistan War.
It's over 1 million. Yeah.
1.2 million, and the amount of people who've died in the wars is 1.1 million. So we have exceeded that with just a virus. I mean, but if you go to Israel, the percentage of the population that we can memorialize have died in service of the country has been much more as far as the percentage, that we have in the United States.
Yeah. Terrific. There's a place in Israel outside of Tel Aviv called the Bullet Factory. Has anyone ever heard of that?
I've gone 3 times.
It's called the Ayalon. It's called the Ayalon Institute.
Ayalon, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And the Bullet Factory is hidden under a fake kibbutz.
Yeah, it's a favorite watering hole for tourists.
And it's also a favorite of the Volunteers for Israel to go to. As I said, I've gone 3 times.
Right. They helped me go there years ago too.
Right.
So.
And I took when I took our granddaughter on her 14th year for her bat mitzvah, it was a year later. We went on this little tour of Israel all together as a family, and they took us to there. I said, "Oh, familiar." It gets looking better and better each time. Now they have a wonderful little cafeteria attached to it and everything. But we've gone to some other places that are quite remarkable up on the border between Lebanon and Israel, where they have the fences and you can't go over them because they have mines still in the fields there.
Right. Beersheba.
I'm going to stop recording at this point and run us into our normal schmooze session. All topics are on the table. And thank you again, Barry, for your
pleasure.
Fascinating life adventures.
Okay. I just thought of another one.